Westeros gets absolutely wrecked by Robert's Rebellion, but does Robert's Rebellion even happen if Cersei marries Rhaegar as Tywin originally intended? And when I stop and think about it, no, I don't think it does. The marriage that might have potentially saved the realm might be Cersei and Rhaegar Targaryen, who'd have thunk? Now, before you start arguing in the comments, let me explain my thought process here. So let's first look at what actually happened. So what actually happened is Tywin wanted Cersei to marry Rhaegar. And at first this seemed like, not a huge stretch. Aerys and Tywin were originally pretty close friends. Tywin is handed the king to Aerys. And so again, this seems plausible. But then their friendship starts to fray. Tywin and Aerys aren't getting along as much. Tywin does a really good job as Aerys' hand of the king, and Aerys starts to feel like credit is being overly given to Tywin instead of him, the king, and he gets all jelly about that. So eventually when Tywin brings it up once again, like openly and asks like, hey, can we confirm this? Aerys is like, absolutely not. It would be ridiculous for me to marry off my son to the child of my servant. That would be messed up. And of course, Tywin took that super well. It didn't affect him at all. It didn't stay with him and haunt his every dream moment, whatever. Yeah, Tywin was fucking pissed. Then not so shockingly, just a year or two later, Aerys goes through the most traumatic event of his life that, leaves him fully fucked up. And that is, of course, the Defiance of Duskendale. So the Defiance of Duskendale is when Aerys basically gets kidnapped by the Lord Darkland. Lord Darkland of Duskendale, because Duskendale, once upon a time, before Aegon's conquest, they thought that they were something, and so they wanted to have more rights like Dorne does, and everyone else is like, haha, sorry, no one gets rights but Dorne, because Dorne is special. But Darkland is like, hey, okay, fine, but what if I kidnap the king? And thus starts a 6-month siege of Duskendale, in which Aerys is being held captive and tortured, and this is what eventually leads to him going full crazy, because he'd always been kind of a dick, but he wasn't cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. But then, Duskendale happens, and then afterwards, he's loco. He's crazy bananas. He's off his rocker. But the reason that he stays stuck in Duskendale for 6 months enduring this torture is because Tywin is just in charge, and Tywin isn't doing a ton to get him out. Now, if you were to ask Tywin at the time, oh, what are you doing? He's like, oh, well, I'm laying siege, and we don't want to send anyone in because that risks the life of the king, so we're just gonna play this by ear, take the safe route. And the safe route, of course, leaves Aerys imprisoned, in dungeons. Now, I think it's pretty easy to connect the dots and be like, yeah, Tywin was leaving Aerys in Duskendale, hoping that basically either he gets kind of back at him for all the bullshit that he's put him through, including the slight with Cersei, or best case scenario, if he can leave it long enough without making it look bad, Aerys might die and then he gets to be regent to Rhaegar. Actually, I think by Defiance of Duskendale, Rhaegar is probably about 18. So Tywin wouldn't be his regent, but an 18-year-old king, without a lot of experience is probably a lot more malleable than, crazy, or not so crazy, but dickish Aerys over there. Anyway, of course, Aerys would eventually get rescued by Barristan Selmy, but by then he's fully gone crazy. He now has this obsession with torture and fire and all this shit, and that would eventually lead to the events of Robert's Rebellion, where Rhaegar pulls the shit with Lyanna, and then the Stark Bros, not the Stark Bros, but just the singular, Brandon Stark goes down to King's Landing to demand an audience with Rhaegar. Aerys goes crazy, eventually starts wanting lots of heads, and then Robert's Rebellion happens. Yada yada yada. But to my point, if Rhaegar marries Cersei, does any of that happen? I don't think so. And that's whether or not Aerys goes crazy. Because the first and easiest argument is, I think if Rhaegar marries Cersei, then Tywin never leaves, probably never leaves Aerys in Duskendale for that long. So there is the potential that Aerys never goes crazy, or at least the craziness is delayed. And honestly, I think in either scenario, like it doesn't matter almost, because say Eris like doesn't go crazy, then Tywin goes on dealing with him for as long as he, I guess, wants to, because he's now like very invested in the future of the Targaryen line, which Cersei has now married into. So either Eris plays ball with him, whether he's, you know, cuckoo or not, or I assume Tywin at any point decides like when it's best to maybe take him out and then install Rhaegar, and then Cersei is now queen. And for anyone who's going to argue that like, oh, Tywin's like too smart or whatever to like attempt to like do something crazy like that, and I would say no, he's not. Tywin is blinded by ambition pretty often, and often goes for the most ruthless approach. And yeah, I think he would be smart enough not to like do it in the open, but I don't think he would have any problem with people perceiving him as like the true power behind the throne and knowing like what he's capable of. And at that point, depending on when he takes Eris out, he's still gonna be that like Hand of the King, probably mentor figure for a very young Rhaegar, who at this point, you know, is probably been fully brought into like the Lannister corner by Cersei. So either Eris, you know, goes cuckoo and Tywin has no problem kind of taking him out because the actual person that he wants to be king gets to be king next, in this case Rhaegar, because then Cersei gets to be queen, or he doesn't go crazy but he stays a dick, in which case I think he still basically offs him if it ever is more fortuitous for him to do so. Again, my point is like Tywin uses people to like fulfill his own ambitions, and if he has set his sights on Cersei becoming queen and his, you know, like offspring being the future of House or you know, like his descendants being the future of House Targaryen, then that's going to be where his energy lies. He's not going to have an issue, you know, dealing with Eris, because he's already shown us that he is willing to put Eris in danger and keep him there. And so with the threat of like Eris going crazy and or just, you know, continue to rule kind of neutralized with Tywin having this like extended like vice grip over the Targaryen line, I don't think we ever see a Robert's Rebellion, because we don't ever, I think, get to the point where Eris is out of control enough to instigate it without Tywin cleaning up his mess. Because also remember, Tywin quits being Hand of the King shortly before Robert's Rebellion takes place, because Robert's Rebellion, the seeds of it get planted at that tourney at Harrenhal, and that's where Jaime Lannister gets inducted into the Kingsguard expressly against Tywin's wishes, and that's when Tywin is like fully done with Eris. So if Tywin never removes himself from, you know, the equation, I don't think Robert's Rebellion is ever allowed to get to that point, because in a way Tywin enables it by sitting on his hands and letting like everything go wild. Anyway, I actually really enjoyed this What If. Thank you to my mutual Morgan over here. It like this was a good one that I feel like we can base in like known facts, and it's not just like me pulling out like a random scenario out of my ass based on nothing. But anyway, if you guys have any other what ifs that you want me to go through or like try to think of, please drop them in the comments. I hope everyone has a great night, and yeah, bye-bye.